If you're struggling with logical reasoning, this one's for you. I got a question here asking, my weakest section is logical reasoning. When I do mini practice sections, my scores are almost perfect, but on full-length practice tests, my scores are only 15 out of 26 and 13 out of 25. How can I improve? So my question here is, what exactly is a mini practice section? There's no such thing when it comes to official LSAT materials. I'm wondering if you have some sort of Frankenstein section of only easy questions. So I'm not sure what you're working on there, but I would always recommend sticking with actual official LSAT questions from real previously administered exams. You can get them in Law Hub, and then you'll get a more accurate read of where you actually stand. As you're seeing, there's a major discrepancy here from the mini exam versus the real exam. So of course I would take those 15 out of 26 and 13 out of 25 results as being much more representative of where you actually are. Now that we got that out of the way, let's deal with how can you improve. So of course, stick with doing full timed sections, always to get the best realistic picture of where you actually stand. I'll also cover for you here some of what are going to be the most common question types in logical reasoning as your best starting point for progress. So the most common types in LR are inference questions, necessary assumption, and flaw. So with inference, we've got both must be true questions and most strongly supported questions, which are asking you for very different things. Must be true means 100% guaranteed by the stimulus, leaving no ambiguity at all. In contrast, we have most strongly supported questions, which give you a little bit of wiggle room. If must be true is 100% supported, most supported is like 90% supported. So they're asking you, therefore, what is the most reasonable assumption or inference you can make? What is incredibly likely to be true based on the information in the stimulus? Then we have flaw questions, which are simply asking you to identify what is the major problem or gap in the argument. You're going to have some classic logical fallacies like ad hominem personal attacks, correlation causation, confusing necessary and sufficient conditions. For example, there are roughly a dozen of those that are incredibly common on the LSAT. Then you have some that are more unique to a specific argument, asking you what has the argument failed to consider, or what has it taken for granted that it should not have done. You also have what people call assumption questions sometimes, but are actually two different types of questions. You have necessary assumption versus sufficient assumption. Necessary assumption is required by the argument. These question stems will contain words and phrases like depends upon, requires, and assumes. Then you will have sufficient assumption questions that contain words and phrases like allows, enables, follows logically if assumed, and properly inferred if assumed. So necessary assumption is required by the argument, which means if you take the stimulus as given, you are logically committed to agreeing with all underlying necessary assumptions, which is why I frame them in my taxonomy or categorization, what have you, as really being a very specific kind of must be true question. So again, necessary assumption questions are actually a very specific kind of must be true question. If they were not true, the argument would fall apart, which is why the argument requires them. So they are actually needed by the argument, or they need to be the case in order for the argument to work. In contrast, sufficient assumption questions are asking you for new information that, if true, would guarantee the argument 100%, leaving no ambiguity at all. Doesn't matter how strong it is, as long as it gets the job done. So one thing you might want to do when you're doing these actual full practice tests is look at what you're getting wrong in that logical reasoning section. You mentioned getting 15 out of 26 or 13 out of 25. So for those 11 or 12 that you're getting wrong, do you notice any trends in question type? Are you getting a lot of inference questions wrong? If so, is it a must be true or a most supported? Are you getting necessary assumption questions wrong? Are you getting flaw questions wrong? If so, review the fundamentals. You could do that in an LSAT prep textbook or in an LSAT prep course. For example, at LSAT Unplugged, we have on-demand videos covering these types in full-length class recordings as well as bite-sized videos. We have live classes via Zoom 4 nights a week covering games, reasoning, and reading comps. You could, of course, join the logical reasoning classes and ask your questions live. We'll also take your requests for what you want us to cover in class, and we'll add that to the agenda. You can join live and ask your questions of the instructors, or you, of course, you can also watch the videos later. But regardless, of course, make sure that after you review the fundamentals and you learn how to approach these, you then drill them using actual real LSAT questions. We have categorizations, and then of course you can do them again in the context of a full section to also work on your pacing and work on your endurance as well. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. I hope you found the video helpful. If you did, please do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to see it. And in the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.